Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you spending your evening with us. We're going to be talking about college visits and how to make the most of them and how to have fun and also be strategic. And so I'm Bari Norman, and I have with me this evening one of our senior counselors, Jacob Hansen. And while we are waiting for people to come into the room, because there's still the number keeps ticking up. We'll do some very, very quick introductions. So as I said, I'm Bari Norman. I am the head counselor and co-founder at Expert Admissions and former admissions officer at Barnard. And I would love to pass it over to my colleague, Jacob, who can tell you a little bit about himself.
Sure. Thanks, Barry. So as Barry mentioned, my name is Jacob, one of the counselors here at Expert Admissions, former admissions officer at Harvard College. And most relevant for the topic tonight, my other role while I was an admissions officer at Harvard was to direct the tour program. So any families that came through Cambridge were hoping to see Harvard's campus. I helped kind of them plan their visit, made sure that they got associated with a tour guide. I trained the tour guides to make sure that families had great experiences. And just in general, on a daily basis, got to work with families who had, I'm sure many of the same questions that you all have about kind of what's a college visit all about? How do I learn whether a college is the right place for me, and especially in such a short time frame that you might have when you're on campus. So I'm excited to share a little bit about kind of, what little wisdom I've picked up over the years with you all tonight.
Thanks so much, Jacob. And we also have one of our staff members on tech support. So if there's any tech issues or anything, just please leave us a note in the comments and we'll take care of it. On that note, just a couple of housekeeping items. I'm going to put a poll up. We'd love to see what grades are represented. It will help us adjust our answers and our responses. So if you wouldn't mind letting us know what grade you or your student is in, that would be super helpful. And we got lots of questions as people registered. We give people an opportunity to ask questions. We've included those questions many of those questions in our program for this evening, but obviously some questions may come up as well. So please feel free to ask them. We just ask that you put them in the Q&A section as opposed to in the chat, and we will be monitoring that as we go. So it looks like a little over 40% are juniors and about a third are sophomores, and then a mix of other years. So thanks to everybody for participating and letting us know. We will, as I said, adjust our questions or our responses, I should say, given the years that we know are represented. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Like I said, college visits, they're fun, hopefully very productive, but you also want to think strategically about them because you're spending the time and the energy and the resources to go visit. You don't have an unlimited amount of time to do so, and so you want to make the most of the time you have to visit campuses. So as Jacob said, he directed the tour guide program and the tour program at Harvard. I actually did it at Barnard as well, so I think we're pretty good people to be talking about this
We
tonight.
both tours here.
Yeah, exactly. And but let's start with an obvious first question, Jacob. I'd be curious to hear, which is, how do you decide where to actually go? Because you've got sort of all these colleges out there. A lot of times people are starting visits before a true list has really formed, and you've got to make some choices about where to venture to first and where at all. So how do you figure it out?
Yeah. So as with most things admissions related, it's going to depend on the student, on the family. When you're really just getting started, and whether you're, a junior who's, maybe going to be applying in the next couple of months, or a sophomore who has a little bit more time to be thinking about that, you really just want to start by casting a wide net. You can't really start until you just start. College visits are a very iterative process, as you're kind of getting a feel for what you do like in a college campus, what you don't like so much in a college campus. You just kind of have to start by checking out some college campuses. So for you, that might be a trip that you're going to be taking to a place where there's a couple of colleges you might be interested in. You just set a couple of hours aside and you're able to check out a couple of campuses, maybe get an official tour in or two. And then from there, it kind of snowballs. You get a sense of, oh, I really liked this campus, didn't really like this campus so much. And from there, you could continue to research and kind of continue to narrow your field. One good pragmatic start is going to a place that's got a lot of different types of colleges, big universities, small universities, public, private, small liberal arts schools, so you can get a great feel kind of as efficiently as possible, not to be reductive about it, but you get to see a lot of different types of schools. A pretty big pitfall that some students will fall into is only visiting kind of the super reach schools, the ones that they're really, really excited about. And that's great. You certainly should visit the schools that you're excited about, schools you might be applying to on an early action or early decision basis. But don't just visit those. As you're kind of visiting schools, as you're putting together a list, you want to have a very kind of, again, a wide net, a broad sense of lots of different types of schools that you might be interested in, you might be applying to over the course of the cycle. So those, kind of pragmatically, that's something that I would advise. Virtual visits too are super valuable, especially you all are very lucky because over the last 5 years, colleges have put so much more effort into virtual resources for students. When tours were shut down, nobody could visit campuses as much as they wanted to. So there's lots of good content online where you can get a feel for the campus before setting foot. Lots of student kind of publications, student blogs that they're putting out. So lots of info online. There are some other online resources that are great. Coursava is a good one. Bigfuture.com is a good one. These are ways where you can kind of start to sort things that as a very initial step, the things that you find most important to your college search, the things you're thinking you're going to prioritize. So those are some good, easy, low-cost ones. And then your college counselor. Your counselor will have known students who maybe were much like you, who graduated in years past. They know kind of what their college experiences have been like. They'll have a good sense, they know you quite well. And so these are all just lots of resources that you can use as you're getting started. And then once you visited a few, it gets a little bit easier because you know kind of what you like and what you're looking for.
Yeah, I also, one of the things I think of is there's a lot of pragmatic things. You had mentioned sort of location and what's around there, and not visiting necessarily just like the reach schools. I think it's a lot of times I'll tell people, start with something you like a place that you're very excited about, and then kind of work out from there. But it is so smart to include places that maybe that particular school you don't think you might be interested in, but you're going somewhere where there's a really big rah-rah school, and then nearby or relatively nearby, there's a small liberal arts college. Like, go take a look just to even see, even if you think that, or that you don't want to go to a small liberal arts college. There stranger things have happened than that people pop in somewhere and are surprised, pleasantly surprised that they may have an interest in a place like that. One other thing I thought of is that for demonstrated interest, that's like a big part for a lot of people for deciding where to go. Some schools care if you visit or not in person, or if you engage with them or not. Your experience at Harvard, Jacob, does it matter there? Obviously, it's a very particular answer, but I'm sure people are curious. How did that factor in or not over at Harvard?
Yeah, it didn't factor in too much. Again, so Harvard it does not measure demonstrated interest. But it was nice to honestly, I think the way that it mattered most is if in maybe an application, and we'll come to this later on, where the kind of value that these visits have on not just deciding where to apply, but once you're applying, kind of what you're able to write about. Sometimes I'd see like, a student write about a really great tour that they had with one of my tour guides, and they remembered their name. And it was clearly a really nice experience. And that was nice. Obviously with that particular admissions process, usually it didn't tip the scale too much, but it was still good. And, it showed that the student, it usually enabled the student to have a little bit better of an idea of what life on Harvard's campus was like. And that tended to make it just a touch easier for us as we were reading applications to, see them here as a student. They knew something about what the opportunities were on campus. And so they kind of had a general sense of where they might find their homes. And that helps in the admissions process.
Yeah, I definitely I agree. I think students see campuses and experience them. They're not just walking around looking at buildings, they'll be talking to people, and we'll get to this, they'll be kind of gathering a lot of information, which just makes them more knowledgeable about a school and just more, just better equipped to write good, solid supplemental essays when the time comes. And so the benefit, yes, is in figuring out, do you like this place or not, or this type of place or not? But there's so much to be gained from just becoming more familiar with the college, and not even just that college, but then really getting a sense of the differences between the different colleges that you're considering or that you'll ultimately apply to, because you put together a list of schools because they share things in common, but you'll see when you become an applicant, when you're not no longer sort of the prospective, sort of when you're looking, but when you actually become an applicant, that the real key is understanding the differences between the different schools that you've picked, precisely because they share a certain core group of characteristics in common. And if you visit a place and you really engage with it, you're just much more likely to be able to to communicate that and to be seen as a better fit, which we know is so important. Um, and what about, like, how far in advance do people need to be figuring out where they're visiting, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, sooner is always better. So every school is going to run their kind of tours, their visits a little bit differently, but some of these fill up quite quick. Um, from my personal experience, we would always put all the tour dates for a semester on the website, and they would fill up far quicker than you would expect. So definitely be on the lookout. As soon as you think you're going to be taking a tour, I would just at least look at the kind of offerings, look at maybe when they're posted, see how far in advance they're posted. Um, Definitely try to get your name kind of registered sooner rather than later. If say you find yourself in a situation where you make it to a city with a school you're interested in unexpectedly, or maybe you find a couple free hours you didn't necessarily think you were going to have, and you decide to go to the campus, and it's a little too late to maybe register for the official tour, you can always call the admissions offices, the what's it called, the visitor centers. They're all filled with people who, to the best of their ability, are always trying to help you, always trying to accommodate you. Um, there are no real magic words, but you can ask, like, if they take walk-ins. That's a good word that they'll use kind of in their process. If they have a wait list for tours, in case folks sign up and they can't make it and they cancel their tour. A lot of times, again, they'll try to accommodate you as best they possibly can. Definitely, respect their kind of internal processes in terms of whether they'll take walk-ins, whether they'll take waitlist tour candidates. But waitlist tour candidates, this makes it sound so much more official than it is. Whether they have a
Decisions just
waitlist,
came out. It's like,
I know it's on the brain. But they'll put in the legwork. They'll help you as much as you can. But definitely, it's always better to schedule them as far out in advance as it's feasible. Obviously, we know you're not planning these trips 6, 8 months in advance, but at least a couple of weeks should be looking at kind of
and
the
even the one, if you're going on a school break, like that really is, I think,
yeah.
as early as possible, because those really fill up quickly.
Right, because everybody else is also on school break and they have the
And
same idea. So,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So, and one thing that sometimes students will ask is, oh, I didn't want to sign up because then I would cancel and it's going to look bad. Like, trust us, like, no one's
Nope.
looking if you canceled and rescheduled, or if you just canceled and, didn't reschedule. It's better if you're thinking or pretty certain you're going to make your way to at a particular date, a particular school. Register for the tour and or information session, and if your plans change, you then cancel, as opposed to potentially being shut out. But do
Yeah.
not worry about admissions judging you or thinking something, about your interest or level of interest if you cancel or anything like that.
I appreciated it when students or families canceled. We never assumed that it was because, I mean, they signed up for the tour. We knew that they were not uninterested in the place. But honestly, it was nice to other potential visitors if it opens up those spots. We would always ask in the communications, and again, every school is going to be different with this. Like, if that you can't make it, please do cancel so that those spots open back up for other members of the public. So we always liked it, and like Barry said, you are not at all it's not going to be held against you in the admissions process in the slightest.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes usually this is all, by the way, can be done online. You just go online, you'll get to the visit page. It's all electronic. It's pretty intuitive. You'll see they all almost use the same software, so it'll look familiar as
Yeah.
well. And so super easy to do and well worth your while to do it in advance. And then what about times of year to go? Like, is it better to go during the school year than to go in the summer? Summer is so convenient, but there are
Yeah.
pluses and minuses. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, zooming way out, the best time to do it is whenever you can. Obviously, that's going to differ from family to family, student to student. Better to see a college than not if you can manage it. I'd say if you have the choice, if you have that kind of flexibility during the school year, is definitely the best possible time to visit. The places are very different when students are not in session. It is more convenient to tour during the summer, but the students that you're going to be seeing there during the summer are not usually they're not even college students at all. And if they are, they're not super representative of the full kind of campus student body. So you really just end up looking at buildings, which are empty buildings at that. So a little bit less valuable. Still
I
can be
feel like
valuable.
also the vibe, right, of the
Oh yeah,
campus
it's
and the town,
quiet. It's kind of
so different.
sleepy.
Right. People will
I
go and say, oh, there was no energy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like if you were there when the real kids were there, like it would feel so different.
Yeah, I live in a college town, and it's sort of night and day when the students are gone versus when they come back. So if you can manage it, certainly visiting during the school year is ideal. Um, Again, Barry had mentioned spring breaks, which is super convenient for high schoolers, and oftentimes will not conflict with the college's spring break, and so you get the best of both worlds, right? You are off, but the college students are not. But again, something to keep in mind is that spring breaks are pretty common. They are similar across high schools, across districts. So if you have the time off, odds are lots of other students have the time off. So another reason to look early. My favorite anecdote was always two girls from the same California high school running into each other on the tour who had no idea that the other was going to be there and were super excited because they got to do a tour with their friend. That just goes to show, a little microcosm of just how popular those particular tour dates can get.
Another thing that just came to mind that to consider when you're thinking about when to go, breaks, like I agree, always better to go when the college students are there, the real college students are there and in session. Another thing people take into consideration is weather, right? So if like you're thinking about some schools in the South or like in California, and then you're also looking at some places in New England and you want to go over February break, it's better to go to California or the South
Don't go to New
during
England.
February break and save April for New England because the weather is going to be a lot better, not only to walk around a campus for an hour and a half potentially, but also for travel to not be interrupted for so many reasons. So also helpful to kind of think, like Jacob was saying, sort of zoom out a little bit and think bigger picture for those kinds of scheduling issues. But most important, I think, is just you want to, as best you can, get there when real students are there because they're going to be the best resource that you have.
Mhm.
Um, what about, Jacob, we've been talking about tours and we generally are talking just about campus, the general campus tour
Yep.
and information session, right? But there are plenty of schools out there that have a general tour and they may also offer specialized tours,
Mhm.
oftentimes in maybe engineering or STEM, in film, other any kind of sometimes very particular programs that either they're known for or that they have specialties in. What about when you have that opportunity to do a general tour and a specialized tour? Do we want to talk about sort of, do you do both? How do you figure out which one? What are your thoughts on?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it'll mostly depend on logistics. If you can do both, that's obviously the ideal. It's great. You get to usually chat with different students who are studying different things. You get to see more parts of campus. Obviously, if you're taking the tour, that's your area of interest, I would assume. So you get something a little bit more specialized beyond the, by necessity, more generic overall campus tour. You'd like to think that schools are very smart about how they plan the tours and, and everything works out perfectly and you can, get off your overall campus tour and go right to the specialized tour, and it's launching, 30 minutes later. It's
They do
rarely,
that with the info session usually,
yeah, yeah, but
not
it
with the
rarely,
specialized tour.
no, rarely works that smoothly. So if you can do both, if it happens to work out, if you're there for 2 days or whatever, do both. That's fantastic. Um, if you can't do both, if the schedule conflicts or you don't have that much time there or whatever, we'll tend to default to recommending the overall campus tour. You see the biggest, the kind of the broadest picture of what campus is like there. You talk with the most different types of students, so you just get like the broadest, most overall view of the college, which I say as a good thing. You do want that kind of broad overall sense of the college. But it can also depend on how familiar you are with the campus. If this is something that's like local, that you have certain familiarity with, you've been to the campus before, maybe you don't need the overall campus tour. Maybe you already have that overall sense of the place. And so the specialized tour would actually be the better bang for your buck for that particular visit. It might also depend on why you're interested in the school. If, as Barry mentioned, this is a school that has a very particular program that you're interested in, and maybe your top choice is this school in this program, but if you didn't get into that program, you'd rather go to other schools. If you're a student in a situation like that, then the specialized tour might be more relevant because that's more likely going to be, what your college experience is like if you do end up there. So it's going to depend. Again, like I said at the beginning, the truest
Always.
the reality is it's always going to depend. But you can kind of play it by ear and see kind of depending on the visit, what you're looking to get out of it. I will say that the specialized tours, and especially if colleges are all different as always. Some just have you apply to the college. Some have you apply to particular programs within the college. Some have specialized essays for specialized programs. If you're dealing with a situation like that, that's when the specialized tours can, in fact, be quite helpful because they, much like we were mentioning earlier, just getting, you having a better familiarity, better sense of the place, you'll have a better sense of the program and the work that they do there, what the curriculum is like, what the professors expect of their students, and so you can speak to that in your supplements. So there are on occasion some real pragmatic benefits to doing those specialized tours.
I agree. I think, so often, I think a couple of other things I'll add, because I agree with everything you said, and then also feel that, my experience, and I think our students' experiences, and for those of you who have been on some tours already, and since we've got a lot of juniors out there, I'll assume at least some of you have. After you've gone to like the third college, don't they all kind of sound the same? The blue light, interlibrary loan. You really don't have to be in Greek life if you don't want to be, but you can be, and it can be great. Like, they're trying to appeal to everybody. They don't do a particularly good job of doing what they ask applicants to do, which is to make yourself stand out and help us get to really know you. I feel you can walk away from a general campus tour and not necessarily, doesn't mean always, but not necessarily have a clear sense of how it's different from other places like it. Not from the tour, at least. I think if you do other things on campus while you're there, you can get a good sense. But those specialized tours can be really helpful because we find a lot of times when students get to the point of writing those essays that Jacob was talking about, they know about them, but they really don't know about them to write like a 400-word essay about the program or what they're interested in. And it can be hard to get some of that information. So if you've been on a handful of tours to other colleges, you may find the general tour a little less helpful. Also, if you're going to have time to walk around a little bit, you can kind of get information that way and go on the specialized tour. I think it depends where you are in your visits, and like Jacob was saying, the level of specialization you're going to have, and also how the college admits. So if they admit by program or by school, if this is a place that has where you're applying to, the film program directly, then you're going to want to do that specialized tour. If it's a school of engineering or a college of engineering and they have a STEM, tour, then I would try to make room for that. Because pretty much you're going to be asked about it in the essays, and you'll just be so much better equipped to provide specifics and to be more knowledgeable
Yeah.
and potentially make some context that you can revert back to when the time comes to start writing.
Yeah.
So just a couple of other reasons to weigh one versus the other. Um, but yeah, so and then what about a couple, I just talked a little bit about or referenced at least doing other things while you're on campus. Families and will often ask, or students will ask, should I schedule time to meet with a professor? Should I reach out to somebody to talk? What are your thoughts about kind of the value of that or some of the potential pitfalls to doing that?
Yeah. So for most of these, should I try to talk to a professor who's doing work I may be a little bit interested in? Should I try to talk one-on-one with an admissions officer? The short answer is that you probably don't need to do that. Certainly not an expectation. And usually it's not going to tip the needle much, if at all, with the actual admissions process later on. Um, I would say you mentioned pitfalls, and there are certainly plenty. These folks are all very friendly, of course. Professors, if they agree to meet with
All
you,
of them are.
so friendly. Admissions officers, so friendly. Um, you'll want to make sure if you're ever, taking time out of somebody's day, if they're agreeing to meet with you, you got to make sure that you're holding your own. If you're going to meet with a professor, you can't just be going into the office and wanting to pick their brain or wanting to just learn a little bit more about what they're doing. You'll have to be able to actually talk at length about maybe stuff that they're doing, maybe stuff that you're particularly, maybe something that you're engaged in. They'll have to see that there was a very good reason why you reached out to them in the first place, and they'll have to feel like it was a good use of their time. Though again, they're all so very friendly. But even then, even if it goes super well, it's usually not going to, come into play during the actual admissions procedure. They don't count that really as like demonstrated interest or anything like that if it's a school that takes that into account. So I wouldn't stress much about that. I would just focus on trying to glean as much as you possibly can from the tour itself, certainly, and then there are some other easier, I would say, things that you can do to kind of engage with the campus while you're there that we can chat a little bit about in a bit, Barry, that I think will give you more and will help you more than getting a one-on-one with a professor for 20 minutes or stopping the admissions officer after the info session.
Yeah, I think people have this sense of like if you make that personal connection, that it's going to matter in the admissions
Mhm.
process, that whether that professor is going to go and say, oh, I met
And
this.
a reasonable thought to have, certainly.
Absolutely, and but the reality is that when it really comes down to it, and this is different than the way it works in the rest of the world, mind you, right? We're
Mhm.
aware of that this is a logical thing to think, but it just doesn't happen to apply in this particular process. Is that there isn't that real space in the process for things like that to weigh. And like Jacob was saying, you really have to be able to hold your own if you're going to go speak to a professor about their work or their field. So you should be well aware of their work. You should be able to hold like a real conversation about the area. They're super busy. And if you've asked them for their time and they've given it to you, you need to make it not only worth your while, but worth their while as well. And it's no like checkbox, oh, I did that, so I can even mention it in my essay. Just mentioning it in your essay isn't going to make them think, oh, this person is more compelling because they set up an appointment with somebody on campus.
Mhm. Mhm.
If it's really something you're interested in, you're super engaged in something at a high level and want to chat about it, go for it.
Yeah.
But just to
But
do it.
And that'll translate, I mean, this is maybe admissions officer speak, but that real committed, genuine interest, that's going to come out tons in the application. It won't be the fact that you met the professor, it kind of, it's self-fulfilling, right? It's not going to be the fact that you chatted with the professor. It's the real genuine interest that led to that will end up benefiting you far more anyway. So,
Absolutely. And then I'm just looking at the questions. I just wanted
yeah.
one clarification. We talked earlier and said, earlier is better to go visit. And just to be a little bit more specific about that, we generally tell people to wait until junior year to visit, because the truth is anything you visit as a sophomore, if it's something that you are still considering later on, it will certainly be a place you need to go back and revisit. Your lens is going to be so different a year plus from, 10th grade. And it will be too far back really in almost every instance. So we always tell people, listen, if you're really itching to go see campuses, and some people are, and you're in 10th grade or 9th grade, or sometimes people are going through a town, or they're on vacation and they're going to be nearby, go for it. But I think of it more as like a general sort of fact finding. We're just poking around as opposed to really looking for yourself as like a real sort of look, almost like a consumer, if you would. Real good visits will tend to happen in not only junior year, but absolutely at the beginning of senior year. This is a crucial time for visits. You know the best of what you want. You have the best sense of where the possibilities are for you because you're speaking with your counselor who's going to be able to tell you not just academically where you fit, but fit wise where you might have a chance. So you've got so much more information and you have the best lens to look at everything through. So junior year, beginning of senior year, you may do revisits in senior year, right? Places that you like that you now think maybe I want to do this early. That's a great time to go visit, stay overnight over a weekend, see if this really is your place. You saw sort of the initial surface view. Now go in and really experience it as a student, let's say overnight, or even just as another visit. So, you can go as a sophomore, you can go as a ninth grader, but I think the best visits will happen not later, but a little later in high
Yeah.
school, actually. The earlier, the better. We were talking about was more when in advance to register.
Register. Yeah. Get your name and email down. Don't do it the night before because
Right. And
it's
even
probably
even
full.
2 weeks before, we were
Yeah.
saying a couple of weeks, but 2 weeks before spring break, like you're probably not going to get a
Game
spot
over.
at
Yeah.
the places you want.
So as soon as
Um,
you have the trip or the dates in mind, again, I mean, it should always be free to cancel. If you ever see a college where it's not free to cancel, that's a big problem.
that's another issue.
That's a whole other issue. So it's totally free to cancel, just like book it as soon as you can, no cost. Again, like we mentioned, not going to be held against you if you have to cancel or reschedule or whatever. So that's what the earlier the better is registering, just so that it doesn't fill up without you.
Yeah, exactly. And then and sometimes you'll see, by the way, you know 6 or 8 months in advance that you're doing this because our family lives often and work schedules and getting everybody together actually does get set that far in advance. But you may find that that campus tours only schedule kind of by semester. So you may only see things for the first semester, and then as you get closer to the new year when they have their tour guides scheduled, it will open up. So, you may have to kind of keep checking, especially for those spring break tours, but they'll come online and, you just kind of stay on top of it and you should be
Yeah.
fine. And we were talking about meeting with professors. What about, you mentioned, Jacob, about like meeting with admissions officers when you're there. I know at Harvard, you had a lot of people just, with big smiles waiting to say hi
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
meet. Can you talk a little bit about also the potential benefits, but also pitfalls of kind of wanting to show up and become BFF with the admissions officer while you're there?
Yeah, yeah, certainly very similar to the professor, although I wouldn't, and none of my admissions officer friends would ever lump themselves in with professors. Far smarter than we are. But it's a similar case, right? Like admissions officers are busy folks. Oftentimes the easiest time that a student sees to kind of get a one-on-one with the admissions officer is after the tour ends, or sorry, after the information session ends, often times right before the tour is beginning, because students will often flow from one to the other. And that can be fine, but again, you'll want to make sure that you have a really good question. It's not going to do you any favors, probably won't hurt you. Again, admissions officers are nice, but won't do you any favors to go up and say, oh, hi, my name is so and so. I go to this high school. Here's my resume that I printed out ahead of time. You don't need to do that. But if you have a very, a real question, if maybe they mentioned that um, they studied something in undergrad, or they, work in this particular part of the admissions process and that's of interest to you, that's great. You can ask a quick question. Always be conscious of their time and be conscious of the flow of the info session tour. You don't want to hold anybody up. So, you certainly can. No one's gonna be rude to you, but just, be friendly. try to make it as quick as possible. And again, go if you have a real question. If you don't have a real question, that's okay. You're not, there's no negative in not stopping and saying hi. And it's probably not going to benefit you too much anyway. A better time to do that possibly, and this might be something, this is not quite in the realm of this, but if an admissions officer is going to visit your high school, that's another really great chance to be able to chat one-on-one. Usually that'll be the area, the geographic rep for your area, and so that won't always be the case if you're getting the information session on campus. So oftentimes that'll end up being kind of an easier, better connection for you anyway, than it would be on the more generic on-campus tour.
Also much more natural, right? They're
Yeah,
at your
they came
school.
to you.
Right, versus kind of showing up at the end just to be like, hi, hi, and like, kind of nothing more there.
Mhm.
And like Jacob was saying, even with whether on campus or if they're at your high school or at a college fair or whatever, if you're going to go up with a question, make sure it's a thoughtful, smart one and not something that you can easily find on the website.
Right.
Just kind of if you're going to make the point of going up, make it worth your while and their while. Same thing we said with the professors, the same idea. But again, no pressure to check the box, right? That I went up to the admissions officer. The ones who didn't, they're going to think weren't as interested, didn't care. Like none of that is going to matter. Now, if it's a school that really strongly takes into account demonstrated interest, and the number of schools that do that is getting smaller and smaller by the year, but there's some that still exist, go up and say, hey, even again, just saying, hey, and introducing yourself, fine. And that is a time to be thoughtful of like, if it is a place that cares a lot, sure, go up and introduce yourself and just say, hey, I wanted to say hi, it was a great presentation. But for the Ivies and for highly selective schools and for all the places that don't track demonstrated interest, it's not worth doing. And there is a way also to go in the other direction. And this is getting a little bit away from campus tours and info sessions, but the person who said hi on the campus tour and said hi here and then sends emails like once a month, hey, like people do these things thinking like I want to get on their radar screen and I want them to remember me, and they'll remember you, but not in the way you want them to. So again, just be mindful that the interactions that you're having are good ones and productive ones and ones that would, if they're memorable for good reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, to Barry's point earlier, we know that this is not how it works in other realms of life. Like in a lot of other situations, yeah, it is good to put a name, a face to the name, to shake the hand and whatever. So reasonable to think that, shaking hands with an admissions officer and giving them your name is going to be helpful. There's just too many. There's just too many applicants. They as much as they would all love to remember every single student that they come across, it can't be done. And that's okay.
And I
You don't
think
have to.
also, Jacob, you can probably speak to this as well. I certainly remember as an admissions officer, this being the case, is that even though you're the one, technically making the decision and responsible for the decision, admissions officers aren't admitting people just who they like best. Like
Yeah.
I so often had to say no to students that I had met on the road that I loved, and I liked them better than the kid I did admit. But even though it may seem like there's no method to the madness, on the other side, there actually is. And you can't just pick the people you like. And there are arguments in committee, and there are just decisions that I make that I don't like making, but I make them knowing how it's going to go. And so there is something to it why we say, it's not worth your time in these instances. Again, in other aspects of life, it absolutely will. But it's just the way that the process is structured. It's just that it's not part of the decision making. What about we've been talking about kind of organized tours and information sessions. What are your thoughts about when, people sometimes say, I have a family member or a friend who's there and they're going to take me around? Like, should you do that and not go on any of the formal tours? Does that matter with demonstrated interest? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's great to do both if you can. If you're lucky enough to know somebody, a friend or a sibling who is at a school that you're interested in applying to, that can be awesome. You get to, arguably the most authentic experience that you could possibly get, walking around with a current student and doing what current students are doing. That's awesome. Um, I wouldn't say that it replaces the campus tour. I think it's still good to actually go on the campus tour. And usually, if you're there on campus already, that's one of the easiest ways to take the campus tour. You just step off for, 2 hours or so and do that and go rejoin with your friend or your sibling or whatever. Um, but it can be, it can be great to do both. I think that, if you have that opportunity, you are sometimes a little bit at the mercy of what that friend or sibling, how they spend their time. Maybe they are not at all interested in the same subjects that you are, so you're not hanging out with people who are, music majors. They're all engineers, and like that's fine. But a lot of times, they might know somebody in a class who does music, and they can direct you in that way. You can make some of those connections, and so you do get a very authentic experience. But I would still, if you can manage to do both, it's really nice to also take the general tour, and get that um, broadest sense of the place as well.
Yeah, and that's a good segue actually into my next thought, which is, like I said earlier, I feel like when you sort of hit your third maybe campus tour, it's kind of like you can give the general tour itself, not the particulars certainly, and there is a lot of benefit to getting in buildings and, hearing some of the particulars about a school. So I don't mean to say that they're not helpful, but I think they get progressively less helpful as you go along. Um, what can you do to help differentiate schools while you're in the moment, to get to know the particular school you're at better, and then also, kind of to expand that to then clearly differentiate them from other schools that you may visit in the same trip
Yeah.
or in other trips down the road?
Yeah, so one thing, as you're maybe to get back into the planning stage, don't plan too many tours for one day. You will exhaust yourself, and that's no fun for anybody involved. But it's also not fair to the college and by extension to you as a potential applicant. Um, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're touring a college that you might otherwise really, really love, but it's the fourth one of the day and you're exhausted and you're just not kind of in the mood to be having a good college tour. So
Jacob,
don't
I feel
overload
like your
yourself.
neck of the woods in Boston is a place where
Oh,
that is possible. Like other parts of the country, I think you
yeah,
can sometimes get three in. In Boston, you can get so many since there are so many
a
there.
blessing and a curse. But you see families who have just crammed the day full, and you feel for whatever school is last on that list because they are through no fault of their own kids, families, they're going to be checked out because they're exhausted. So don't do that to yourselves, and put yourself in a position where you're really getting an accurate um, view of what the school is going to be like, and that's not influenced by the fact that you're tired and hungry and cold, as it may be the case up in Boston. So that's one thing, as early as the planning stages. But also, as you're taking these tours, as Barry mentioned, you'll find that they're all very similar. All the dorm rooms have two beds and dressers and desks, and the libraries get quieter as you go up floors. And we have something called shopping week where you get to test out courses. Like it's all pretty much the same, except for at the margins. And really, if it helps your job in taking these tours is trying to find those differences at the margins between these schools, that make one a good fit for you and one maybe not so good of a fit for you. As you're trying to do that, you should be taking notes. Take photos whenever you're allowed. Sometimes they'll ask you to not take particular photos or videos or whatever, but to the extent that you're allowed, take as many photos as you can, because it'll help you remember what the actual school was like, and seeing a photo might help you remember something that the tour guide said, or a thought that you had during that part of the tour. So that can be helpful. Um, pay particular attention to parts of campus that you think that you'll be spending a lot of time in. Again, finding these marginal differences. If you're a musician, right? Like paying attention to the music building if you pass by it, to the gym if you think you're going to be spending a lot of time in the gym, maybe a science complex if that's where you think you'll be spending lots of time, because that will dominate. Just to be a little reductive about it, you have so many hours there, and that's going to dominate the hours that you have on campus. And so you want to make sure that you have as good of a sense of those places as you possibly can. Um, but taking good notes, taking photos, anything that you can do to make sure that you have these, you log these memories, you log these thoughts and these feelings, because when you get to essay writing time and you're trying to like reach back into your memory to remember like what the heck that tour guide said, and they mentioned this one motto and like this one particular class that they loved, you will thank yourself later that you wrote that down, because it'll just make those supplement writing processes that much quicker, that
Yeah,
much
I
easier,
feel
and that
like
much better.
not the more notes, the better, because obviously not
Right.
literally, but
Pay attention to the tour.
yeah, like take notes, like mark down things, write things down. You will not remember the particulars of everything when it comes time for supplements. And students struggle with the supplements more than anything. They know they like the school, but again, knowing you like somewhere and then answering the particular questions they're going to ask you for the length that you need to write them, is totally different. One thing that I kind of have figured out over the years is when I'm taking pictures of a campus, when I'm then either done at that campus or before I take my first picture of the next campus, I take a picture of the floor, because quite frankly, like
Great
I've
point.
gotten to things, I'm like, I'm not sure where that first campus began and the other one ended.
Smart.
I mean, if you're in real different places, it will tell you at the top, obviously location wise, but it's not always clear when you're visiting schools that are nearby one another. And so I do that. And then the other thing, I think maybe I feel like the best advice for visiting a campus, when we're talking about campus tours, we're talking about info sessions, which all are official sort of programming from colleges. But I think the best thing you can do is talk to people not in admissions. Talk to what I'll say regular kids. And I say this as a former tour guide myself, and as a
Mhm.
former person who ran the tour guide program, as Jacob did at his college, I ran it at mine. So with all due respect to the tour guides and the programs, it's still a marketing machine. It's still marketing of the college, and you're still going to get sort of the general pat answers for the most part, and things presented in a certain way and things not shared intentionally. And so when you talk to regular kids and you ask them, why'd you choose here? What do you like? What's different? What surprised you? Be honest. What's one thing you want to change? You really start to get a sense of a place. And I think we mentioned earlier, Jacob may have mentioned it kind of offhand, but whether it's blogs or but certainly like the student newspaper, whether you see an old school, like actual paper version while you're walking around campus or go online, they are talking about everything there, the good, the bad,
Oh
the
yeah, no filter.
no filter. You will see what they're not happy about. You're going to hear about it all. Read it. No place is perfect. Even the school you think is perfect for you. No place is perfect. Find out the pros, the cons. What's going on that's good? What's going on that's challenging? And then you decide, is it a deal breaker for you or not? And there's no right answer. For one person will look at this campus and be like, oh, I'm not dealing with that. And another person looks at it and says, nice to be different, but it's fine. I can deal with it. So you've got to see and figure that out. So yes, do the tours, go to the info session, learn about the place, get the official word, but absolutely talk to regular kids. Stop them. If you see someone who doesn't look like they're like running from place to place,
Yeah.
hey, do you mind if I take a minute? I'm visiting and I just wanted to hear a little bit from you about your experience here. Everybody pretty much is more than willing to chat.
Yeah.
Ask them where they're from, just get some context, ask them why they chose it. Ask the questions that you care about and let them tell you their honest answers. And then you can take it from there. But I think it's so valuable not to just go do the tour, do the information session and get out of there. There are some other things I feel like, I don't know if you have any thoughts about other things you can do besides talking to the kids and eavesdropping, like have lunch in the student center or the
Yeah.
dining hall where everyone eats lunch. Eavesdrop, listen to what they're talking about. Sometimes kids listen and they're like, oh God, I don't know, I'd have anything in common with like what I heard. Or other times people say, oh my God, these are the coolest kids. I totally see myself here. What are some other things maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, like pop by the local coffee shops. There's always going to be a handful on campus, and you can usually tell if there's a bunch of students sitting in there, whether it's a good place to spend, 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever. That can always be nice. The buildings that are open, we'll never tell you to go into a building that's not open, but the ones that are open, meander in there. Don't overstay your welcome, but you can get a sense of the place. And again, really it makes a difference hearing what the students are talking about, kinds of conversations they're having. On the admissions side, we always love to think that like, oh, that's the best part of campus is like, oh, all the cool conversations that students have. And if you ask all the tour guides, they'll say their favorite part is that. So like, you know, try to take advantage of that because if those cool conversations are really happening, no reason why you can't listen in just a little bit. The dining hall, or like a student union, if a college has a student union, eating there, that's awesome. Just taking a walk around campus. You can look at the campus map. You can see where the dorms are and just kind of meander around and see what's going on.
And
That's all great.
the
Yeah.
area around campus, I think also is super important, like the town or the city, depending where it's located. And that may be something you do on foot, depending how big the area is. And it may be something you take time to do in the car after. But really, pay attention as you're getting closer and you're driving, because you'll be able to pay attention and see what kind of area it is. And make sure you go in the different directions, because I've gone to campuses where I came in, drove in one way and thought, oh, this seems pretty much like a dud. There's nothing going on here. And then, once I drive around a little bit or head out in the other direction, you've got this vibrant, college town there. And so you want to make sure that you have a good enough sense, because in college, unlike high school, you spend so little, relatively little time in the classroom. Most of the time will be spent outside of classrooms. So, what you're going to have the opportunity to do on campus, off campus are all things that are helpful to see. And very, very rarely are you going to really see the surroundings out around campus during any kind of tour. Depending
Yeah.
on the way a campus is set up, you might quickly walk past something or through something, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, you're going to have to do that on your own.
Yeah, they'll take you to the hot spots. Because Barry mentioned cars, just a quick aside, always budget more time to get to the tour start location or the information session or whatever. I could not tell you how many times I felt so bad every time the family sprinting down the street because they like couldn't find parking and because they couldn't find the place and you feel terrible because you're like, come in, would you like some water? You're fine, like we'll still let you in. But I always just budget a little bit more time. College towns vary, certainly a ton, but a lot of them are pretty old, pretty dense. The parking can sometimes be um, awful, for lack of a better word. So budget a little bit of extra time for that. And my hottest tip for the parents is bring some quarters. We're in a quarter shortage here in Boston. I don't know if that's the case for those of you at home, but the bank tells me every day that I ask that we're in a quarter shortage. Bring some quarters because, all of those pay meters will have like an app associated with it, but God knows if it'll actually download on your phone, if it'll work. Just bring the quarters so you can put however much time you need in there and you're not having to run out in the middle of the information session. Just a little
That's
hot tip.
very much a city college, like a
Yes.
college within a city tip for sure.
Yeah.
I do agree. I think that the parking, I find, like, especially if you're going during popular times, but the more popular the school, the worse the parking situation is. Either that they just don't have enough of it,
Mhm.
or it's actually just far away, whether it's a big parking structure and it just takes time to get there, or the few admissions visitor spots are taken and you've got to then figure it out. And then there's a lot of stress and then you're arguing before you go in and it's just not the vibe you want to start with. So it is a good idea to get there a bit early, and worst
Relax.
comes to worst, you sit in your car for a little bit or you walk around and grab a coffee or whatever.
Yeah. Even
Better
better.
that than the
Yeah.
running with sweat, and screaming at each other and then being like, shut up, and then going to the admissions office on your best behavior.
Right, exactly.
For sure. We have just a few more minutes, and I want to just look at the questions that came in. We answered some along the way, but just really fast. There's a question about boarding school athletes who have limited time and are in school 6 days a week, limited availability to miss class, things like that. When do you go? The truth is that I don't know any students, athlete or not, boarding school, day school, who are like, I got plenty of time to get off school, and parents
Mhm.
who say they can just get away from their families or work. It's tough. And you know what? If you really can't get away, then maybe you're going to go in the summer, and that's just when you do it. For recruited athletes, you'll have official visits and you'll be invited as part of the admissions process. I know a lot of our students at their boarding schools and even the independent schools, the day schools, they get some, especially seniors, will get some limited days for college visits. It's hard though, the scheduling is super tricky. And I think that's true for everyone, but certainly for an athlete who's traveling and, has practice or kids who are away for school, it's just going to be tougher. I think the key there is the earlier you can, the better. Plan it for whatever few days you have, set those days aside. Sometimes boarding schools also will do some visits as well, like group visits. They offer them sometimes over break, and you might inquire to see if your school does that. But if it's the only time is summer, then that's when you're going to do it. Better than not at all, like Jacob was saying earlier.
Yeah, the best time is the time that you got. Also, of course, I don't know the particular situation, but a lot of admissions offices will offer like little proofs of attendance. They'll get signed. So, if that makes a difference for your school, you can usually get those at the college, and then you can hand it in and say, hey, I didn't just play hooky. I was going and checking out a school.
Yeah. Another question that's here is that if you can't make it for a formal tour, if you're going to do kind of a self-guided tour, an informal tour, and it's a school that has that cares about demonstrated interest, what do you do? So you can still go to the admissions office or visitor center and sign in and check in if you would, and then you'll have the record that you visited campus, even though you didn't necessarily attend a tour or an information session. So whether you're doing a self-guided tour and you're going to walk in there anyway to get a map, or you're going to do it on your own, you can always swing by the admissions office. They're not only open, during admission tours or information session times. So you absolutely can do that. Let's see what else is here. And one thing also is that there's one of the things we shared in the chat. There is, for Tulane is a place that cares about demonstrated interest. Northeastern is a place that cares about demonstrated interest. Tulane is, I love Tulane because they're one of the most, if not the most transparent school out there. And it's wonderful, and it makes the process so much less stressful when the colleges are forthcoming about what they want and what they care about. If you look in the chat, we'll put it in if it's not in there already. Tova, if you could pop it into the chat. There's a blog post from Tulane, and they talk about what engagement is, what engagement isn't. And they just talk very honestly and openly about demonstrated interest, at least in their office at their school. And we think it's a really good primer and a good introduction to demonstrated interest more generally. And so that's something that's worth taking a look at. And let's just see real fast. Hold on. There's just a few others. I'm just looking right here. We got this one. If you're not able to visit every school in person, how do you get a strong feel for a college? There's a lot of virtual programming like Jacob talked about earlier, and that programming has gotten pretty good post-COVID. And so there are ones that are just student-led. There are ones that are information sessions similar to the ones that you would go to on campus. I think just about every place has virtual tours. So if you want to see the place and try to get a sense of it, you can do that. And then just talking to students or recent graduates, no offense to people my age or even a lot younger, talking to people who went somewhere a lot, even 10 years ago, like places change so much. Try to talk to current students or very recent graduates. Those are all ways to really get to know places. By the way, whether you get to campus or not, I would do that. It's just so incredibly helpful. The other thing is that if everybody just kind of goes to the website, clicks on academics, clicks on, their academic area of interest, everybody lands in the same spot and they mention the same things in their essays. How many people are going to mention Dillo Day for Northwestern? How many people are going to mention, I don't know, I'm not thinking of something right now, but there's like the same things over and over again that people mention. And that doesn't work well either. And so again, the more you can really engage with the place and get to know it and talk to people who will tell you about cool and interesting things that you don't find through 5 clicks into the website. Like that's going to
Mhm.
be really worth your while and really helpful in the end.
Yeah.
Um, and let's see here. I think really, well, one last question is just, are there differences in how to approach visits to large public universities versus smaller private colleges? Um, I don't necessarily think you approach them any differently, honestly. You may need a little bit more time to get around the bigger schools for sure. They're just going to require a bit more time because it'll take for longer to get around them. But I don't think how you approach them and how you're thinking about them is any different at all,
Yeah.
actually.
Their logistics might be different, just given how many members of the public they're trying to serve. But your kind of MO should not change.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks to Jacob for joining me for this conversation. We appreciate sharing the information that we have as former admissions officers, tour guide and tour guide program
Mhm.
supervisors, and just, of course, most importantly, the work that we do as students to try and help make this process more transparent and help you make the most of the time that you have on these campuses. So thank you again for joining us. We hope you'll join us again for one of our upcoming webinars. Stay tuned for info on that and have a wonderful night. Thanks, everybody.